Hi, I'm Rebecca Theodore-Vachon.
And I'm Anthony Breznican.
I'm Amy Ratcliffe.
We are here to talk to you about
the Marvel Cinematic Universe and official timeline.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. I am privileged to be joined by not one, but three guests today. And those three guests are the fine journalists who have just written the Marvel Cinematic Universe, an official timeline, a subject very close to my heart. Guys, how are you? Amy, Anthony, Rebecca, how are you today?
We're good.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much for joining me to talk about this wonderful project that I know, having seen the book, must have been an absolute ton of work. And before we delve into that, I was wondering if you could each share with me what your an early Marvel memory, an early Marvel comics memory, and a Marvel movie memory.
Okay.
I'd like to go first.
We'll let you go.
I remember. Go first, Anthony.
All right, I'll go first. One thing you'll discover about us is that we're very much like the Three Stooges, like all trying to let the other one through the door until then we all bang into the frame. Early movie memory and an early comics memory, Marvel comics memory. Well, I would say, the Secret Wars was an early comics memory for me, but also the X-Men of the 1990s wasn't the earliest memory of comics, but really the first time I remember consistently reading issue after issue, waiting to see what would happen next. And so that those X-Men runs were legendary and really helped capture people's imaginations and set the tone for much of I think a lot of the movies to come, since especially X-Men was some of the earliest let's say official Marvel movies. But an early Marvel movie memory. Now, are you talking MCU or
MCU? I think, yeah, MCU.
Yeah, okay, because there were quite a few Marvel movies that came before they got started, but I think I remember paying for my ticket to see Iron Man on opening night and really being blown away by how fun that movie was and what a great job Robert Downey Jr. did in that role. And that movie was just fun, just pure fun, in a way that sneaks up on you. That's one of my favorite memories. And of course, waiting until the end. That was at a time before everyone knew to stick around until the end of the credits for virtually every movie now. So that it's one of the all-time great post-credit sequences, if not the. I mean, what do you guys think? That's got to be like the best post-credit sequence of all time. You're part of the bigger universe, Mr.
Yes.
Stark.
Yeah,
definitely of the MCU.
Yeah,
there can be no doubt because it's the original, right? So it's the it's the thing that sets the whole thing up, and I think it's a great choice because that was a fascinating year for films, because there's another comic book movie released in that year which is a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, directed by Christopher Nolan, Dark Knight, and it's not even my favorite comic book movie of the year. My favorite comic book movie of the year is Iron Man, because it's just such pure joy.
And it holds up so well.
Yeah,
like I think I go back and watch that, I'm like, this is a pretty flawless film.
Yeah, I agree. The beats are so perfect. I mean, you have the entire MCU writ large in that 2-hour moment, the formula for all of it, for how it all works. It's such an amazing achievement, I think. And I think Jon Favreau just did such an incredible job. How about yourself, Rebecca?
Favorite comic book memory or earliest comic book memory?
A favorite Marvel memory and an MCU memory.
Well, definitely. I started my introduction to Marvel was X-Men. So I read the comics, and I was just fascinated by like these group of mutants that were just kind of like didn't fit into society, and then they had the mentor and Professor X. But then, of course, what's interesting, like revisiting X-Men, is kind of realizing like how dysfunctional some of their relationships with Professor X were. I'd have to go with Anthony. Iron Man, really, I mean, it's the first movie of the cinematic universe, Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I was just really impressed by how great it was. I mean, Robert Downey Jr., like, to me, one of the great things I think about the MCU is like the casting. And Robert Downey Jr., to me, in my opinion, was born to play that role. I try to think of other actors playing Tony Stark, and I'm like, I don't know.
Very well said. Very well said. I couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
how about yourself, Amy?
Oh, so I came to the comics so much. I was thinking back when you were talking about X-Men, both of you, and that, I watched that animated series when I was a kid, but as a kid, like, comics were just not something. I grew up in a very small rural town, and comics just weren't on my radar. So I didn't discover the X-Men comics until so much later. And then I was like, wow. But my comics moment, one of my favorite characters is Daredevil. And certainly in history, like, his run of comics, it's not the most cheerful of characters or settings. So when Mark Waid and Chris Samnee's Daredevil run came out, and it was just joyful, and Matt Murdock was a goof, and Samnee's art was so light and beautiful, that comic series like has a special place in my heart, because like it gave me, like, as much as I love Born Again and all those stories, I'm like, oh, a happy Daredevil, it's okay, the world has not ended. So that's my favorite kind of Marvel Comics story and memory. And then for the MCU, I love Iron Man, but Captain America First Avenger, I think, is such a gorgeous film. I love anything that has a hint of a romance. So that little thread they planted with Peggy and Steve, like, that's, oh, when that came full circle, look, I sobbed many times during Endgame, and the Infinity Saga, the Infinity War. But I love seeing that come full circle. I love Joe Johnston making a period film that was so early in the MCU, to see that completely different style than Iron Man. And I think Chris Evans, like, I love the character of Steve Rogers, right? And he gets written off by some people. I was like, he's such a goody two shoes, he's boring. And I just think he's so earnest, and I think there's such resilience in being an earnest and kind person in this world who's just trying to do the right thing. I think Chris Evans portrayed that journey from little skinny guy to beefed up super soldier and everything that came with it really beautifully. And that's one I also love to go back to.
I read when you said it was boring, and
yeah.
She made a great face, and I agree. Like, yeah,
exactly. I hear that, and I'm like, don't you insult Steve Rogers just like people who insult Superman. I'm like, no.
Funny, when you mentioned the X-Men animated series, I could immediately hear the metal, the heavy metal, like, opening song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It is brilliant the way all these Marvel touchstones can just hotwire your emotions audio visually in so many different ways, right? And just to touch upon what you just said, I'm a huge Captain America fan. My grandfather fought in an American unit in World War II and came back to Liverpool in the 40s as a huge Captain America fan. And I think the great thing I think about Chris Evans' performance is Captain America is a character that would be very easy to get wrong, and yet Joe Johnston and Chris Evans make all the right decisions, on the script writers, all the way through that movie. And then you've got the template for the way he permeates the MCU, right? It's amazing.
Hey, and there's a little personal connection back, is that they shot a fair amount of Captain America in Liverpool, doubling it for 1940s Brooklyn.
I of course I know that, but I love that piece of detail. And it's the Albert Dock in Liverpool, and which looks like 1930s dockyards in New York, of course.
That scene where right before he gets to the dock, when he escapes from his pod now as the powerful Captain America, and he chases the Hydra agent through the street, and he crashes through the window of the bridal shop because he can't really control his movements yet. That was all shot there too. I happened to be on set for that, so I always watch those scenes like, oh, I was there for that one, and that was in Liverpool.
That is amazing, mate. Did you enjoy Liverpool?
I did, yeah, it was great. I think there was a there was a football game that day, so it was quite rowdy.
Oh well, yeah, that would almost certainly be Liverpool Football Club, and which soccer is a religion in my hometown, of course, like music is, like comics has always been to me. And I think why I've been looking forward to talking to you guys is this is such an exhaustive piece of work that you've done. So first up, how did you guys collaborate with each other, taking such a big chunk of mapping out this Marvel Cinematic Universe?
I can answer that if you guys want, since I was the first one on the project, and with our editor David Fentiman, put together the outline for the book, which continued to grow as we did more research, and the research was just simply watching the movies, studying them, listening for little moments when somebody would say, "This happened 5 years ago," or "This happened 5,000 years ago," and trying to figure out where we need to add things to the outline. And then we came up with a lot of the interstitial pieces, the focusing on Captain America's shield or Iron Man's armor, various individual characters or moments, battle sequences from the film that deserved being pulled out and examined a little more closely. And then we recruited Amy and Rebecca, who were two of my favorite people in general. So I was delighted to work with them. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of sitting around a table. There was none of that. We live in different parts of the country. So we weren't quite collaborating in the sense of looking over each other's shoulder and helping each other write or guiding each other. They took their sections and ran with them, and I did mine, and now we have it all unified. But I'll let them talk about their feeling about it.
I'm trying to remember, did we have it's been, what is time, right? But early on, did we have one Zoom meeting together? I feel like to kind of talk some. That's right, yeah. Where we were kind of oh, but then what about this location? And then we kind of all went and made our let's put all of this stuff in the book, David. And he was probably yes, but maybe let's dial it back a little.
Exactly. I think that's a sign of our efficiency that we were able to knock it out with one Zoom.
Yeah. And for anybody who's not aware of this, what we're dealing with here is a kind of three musketeers of really high level pop culture writers. So there's not just one of you, there's three of you with this tremendous amount of insight you have into the business before you go in. I know you're all huge fans, but I mean, I think Marvel really put this project together really well. In terms of how you actually split it up between the three of you, what was your kind of respective brief? Did you do it movie by movie, or did you segment it in another way?
You would answer that one, Rebecca.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. How did you actually chop the project up? There's a lot of work that you guys did. So how exactly, to get into the weeds of it, did you split assembling the book between you?
Oh, sure. So when I came onto the project, Anthony had been working on it, and then I joined Anthony and Amy. So when we had that Zoom meeting, there was this huge Excel sheet with all the characters and all the different parts of the MCU that we wanted to explore. So it was a matter of hey, do you want to write about this? Do you want to write about Captain America's shield? Do you want to write about vibranium? Do you want to write about the Battle of New York? So it's really, at least for me, it was a mix of things or characters that I loved in the MCU. I love all of them. But I also tried to challenge myself as well about maybe characters that I didn't know as much about, or certain topics I didn't know about. And it was okay, yeah, let me push myself out of my comfort level. So that was really cool. And then, and of course, in that same Zoom meeting, like Amy said, we were also giving suggestions as well. For me, one of the things that has always fascinated me has been this very close platonic relationship between Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton, Black Widow and Hawkeye. And I was just I want to write about that. I want to explore that, because that's such a beautiful relationship, and how it ended was so beautifully tragic. I'm we have to include this in the book. So
I think that's very well said. I could absolutely understand the law of that. In terms of how the book, how is the book ordered for anybody who's watching this and thinks, oh, this really speaks to me, I want to pick it up. Can you give me a flavour of what the finished product is like and how it gets into this timeline?
Well, you guys mind if I answer this one?
Sure.
How it's ordered is really, it's strictly chronological. And I was responsible for writing I guess you'd say, like, the primary timeline chronology, while Amy and Rebecca took the interstitial chapters. And so we tried to place those chapters at a point in the general timeline where they seem most appropriate. So you wouldn't throw the Guardians of the Galaxy into a part of the timeline where those characters aren't really doing anything or aren't active or don't exist. So we kind of spaced it out that way. So whenever you hit a point in the timeline where maybe you wanted a deeper dive into Iron Man's armors, the shields, the history of vibranium, because the Black Panther story begins to play out within the chronology. So that's how we spaced those things out. But otherwise, it was we had a starting point, which is the beginning of their universe and our universe, the Big Bang. So what happens then? And any mention of things in prehistory was, I thought, the most interesting part of it, because it's often very vague. It's talked about as sort of exposition in the movies, so you have to go back to when the Infinity Stones were formed and what references are made to those in the movies. There's a handful of points where they're talked about, and so we take all of those, take everything that the Collector tells the Guardians, for instance, and put that in the early chapters, and then, okay, but when were the Celestials created? They talk about them being before time, right? So where were they? And so those were some of the unknowns, I suppose, that the book will answer. And then we just moved forward in time, and as we do that, just like in real life, your memory is a lot more clear depending on how recent the action is. So things that are actually happening in the movies, just recapping the events that are depicted on screen, it's fairly easy to place. But one of the fun things about doing it was I'm rewatching all of the movies, all the TV shows, and anytime there's a computer screen, I'm pausing it and irritating my children and my wife, and I'm going up to the screen, literally getting up close, so that I could see, is there a date? Is there a date on that newspaper? And sometimes there was, and sometimes I wasn't the one to spot it. It's helpful to have younger eyes that don't need glasses to say, hey, there's a date.
Sure.
When Natasha Romanoff is reading a newspaper at the beginning of The Winter Soldier, and they're doing that action where they're hunting Brock Rumlow, and she's undercover and she's just in a cafe, like, flipping through a newspaper. I'm like, okay, I think there's the date on there that firmly plants that moment in the MCU's calendar. And
so satisfying.
Once you get a hard foundation like that, then it's like, okay, well, I know this happened before that and this happened after that, so we can, you get these little anchor points in the timeline. And that was a lot of fun to do. So anyway, sorry to go on so long, but that's sort of how we structured it.
I think it's a great answer. It's also very cinematic. I don't know if you've ever seen that classic black and white James Stewart film. It's about investigative journalism. It's called Call Northside 77. And the whole case is about him repeatedly blowing up the front page of a newspaper to see a date in the background, which basically exonerates the guy who's been wrongly imprisoned, etc. It's exactly that process. So I think that's a beautiful symmetry, that you're doing exactly that, but within the MCU. Beautifully cinematic. And how long did that process take, guys? Going back and forth between, this book is published by Dorling Kindersley, so I guess you had a lot of back and forth with the editors at DK and the guys at Marvel that you'd be working with, your touchstones at Marvel. How long did it all take you?
Oh, you can go, Amy. I'm sorry.
Oh no, please. My statement was just going to be, I don't remember. So yours is going to be way more insightful. When did we start?
When did you start?
I feel like, well, at least on my part, I mean, I joined in, I think it was like February of 2022 when our editor, when David Fentiman reached out to me. And funny enough, just really quick, I thought it was a hoax. I was about to delete that email. I read it and I was like, wait, they want me to write what? Oh, this is a joke. Next. And then that's when I saw your name, Anthony, in the email. He was like, yeah, I was referred to you by Anthony Breznican. And I was like, oh, okay, this might be something. And that's when I replied to him, and then the ball just got rolling from there. But yeah, so I feel like the initial contact for the book was like in February 2022, and then I believe I started writing in May, I think like April or May, and then I handed in my last draft January of this year in 2023. So
Right.
yeah, about 8 months, 9 months.
And Anthony, when did you originally start talking to David Fentiman, your editor, about it?
That was back. It was in 2021. I want to say it was maybe the early summer that we first began talking about it, and we spent a fair amount of time just going over that Excel document that Rebecca had mentioned. Just creating that took a couple of months just to map out everything. And what's interesting is when they came to me with the idea for the book, it was Marvel's idea. Marvel Studios wanted to create this essentially Bible to show, because they have so many movies and TV now. They just wanted to sort of put it all into one place, that if they have a new filmmaker come aboard one of their projects, and they don't have time to watch 47 movies, they can flip through this book for as any reference to like what has happened in the timeline before that. Just sort of a handy thing you could have on set, you could have in the office. But they also knew that would be a great thing for the fans. So when David brought the project to me, because I'd done a lot of Marvel coverage, one of the first people I called was Amy to say,
That's right. Yes.
Amy, can you give me some advice? I haven't done one of these books before. What are the ins and outs of it? What should I expect?
I feel like you were very vague too. I don't think I knew what the book was. And then months later I got,
yeah. I was vague, but partly because, not because I didn't trust you, but I didn't know that I would actually get the job, and I didn't want to be embarrassed to tell the ruse. So, but then when the editors were interested in hiring 2 other writers to help with the project, I got to weigh in on that, and of course recommended Amy and Rebecca, who I know both for their wonderful coverage of the MCU, so I knew they would be perfect, and they were just absolutely wonderful collaborators who did an amazing job, and I feel so privileged to just share a byline with them finally, because we've always worked at different places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of it, that you're all working together on this project. That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to say really quick, what's wonderful about it is like Anthony and I, we have never met in person. We've had a couple of, Zoom calls during the pandemic when everything shut down. It was just kind of like checking in on each other. But we've never met in person, and we actually met on Twitter.
Yeah.
I feel like, was it like 2015, 2016, I think?
oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
back when
before
Anthony
that,
was at Entertainment Weekly, and of course he was covering all things, Marvel and Star Wars, and we just like kind of struck up a friendship that way. So our whole friendship has been online. And so I'm so grateful that he thought of me in joining this project, because I can talk about the MCU and Marvel all day. And I'm like, great, now I actually get to be part of like the official timeline book. So it pays to follow your passion,
And Amy, what was it like when you finally saw the book all laid out and designed and there in your hand?
Unreal. I got, actually a sneak peek. So I worked with David Fentiman at Dorling. I call it DK because I never get the last part right. I feel like in the US it's more common to call it DK. And I worked with him on a book called Star Wars Battles That Changed the Galaxy that I think we'd wrapped up shortly before he approached me about Marvel timelines. So when I was in London in April of this year for Star Wars Celebration, and I went to the DK office, and to I got to meet so many people that I just know from email. David was actually out, so I still have yet to meet him in person. But while we were there, we were talking about some other projects. The designer was there, like actively working on the timelines book, the MCU timelines book. And that was the first time, like outside of my pages in the pages that Rebecca and I like were working on, it was the first time I got to see the layout for the broader timeline and the whole book. And that's what I knew, right, that it's a massive project. I rewatched many of these movies. It is hours and hours of content, but to see that PDF for the first time, even in the state it was in then, I had a hard time. I'm like, first of all, how robust is your computer that it can handle having this many pages of graphics open? Because mine would implode. And he just kept scrolling and scrolling. And that was when I realized the scope, right? And then it showed up in the mail earlier this week or last week. And I wasn't, I get a lot of packages, especially books, because of my job. So I'm like, oh, okay, something else from Penguin Random House. Like, I'll get to that. And then I pick them like, this is really kind of heavy. And it was the Timelines book. And like, I've looked at it, it's so beautiful. And there's so much information that I've had to I did the very childlike thing first, where I'm like, I'm flipping through all of it right now, immediately. But then I've had to put it aside on the coffee table to read, to go back and look at a few pages a day, because it's beautiful and it's so comprehensive. And I am in awe. This sounds very arrogant, but I'm in awe of all of us, especially Anthony putting together that timeline, David pulling together the pieces, Rebecca bringing all of your incredible knowledge to so many characters and battles and events. And it was just what a super heroic team effort we brought to this.
And I think that's a beautiful thing to hear, because you really can't emphasize what a paving stone of a book this really is. A paving stone of delicious beauty while also being a treasure trove of information. But it's absolutely something that you could almost, if it wasn't so beautiful, use as an offensive weapon, because it is just so big and chunky and detail laced. And
maybe we'll save some lives.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Somebody ends up shot or stabbed with a sword. The book will protect you. It's so thick and sturdy. Strap it to your chest and.
Who needs vibranium?
That's right. Who needs vibranium? We have this book. Yes, exactly right.
Cut some eye holes in it.
No, that is so true. Rebecca, how do you think fans, both serious, hardcore, and casual, are going to react to the book?
I think that's what's the beauty of this book is. I mean, if you're a hardcore MCU fan, this is a great book to add to your collection. Holiday season is coming up. That's if you have somebody who loves the MCU, it's a great, it's a great gift. And then I think the great thing too is that if you're someone who's new to the MCU, who's never watched any of the movies or any of the Disney Plus series, this is your introduction. It's basically a Bible. I call it the MCU Bible, basically. Because I've talked to some people, they have an interest. They might see a trailer or a poster of an MCU movie and they're just like, the movie, there's over 20 movies. Maybe it's too late for me to get into this, or do I have to watch XYZ movie for me to enjoy, Thor Ragnarok? And the great thing about this book now is that now you can get and be like, hey, now you want to know everything about every character, every battle, every, what is vibranium? Where is Wakanda? Who is, anything you need to know about the MCU is right there in the book. So I think it kind of bridges the gap for those who are very knowledgeable of the MCU and those that might be new to it. So, yeah.
Very, very well said. Very well said. And Anthony, why do you think this book is so important for this particular moment in the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Well, as Rebecca just said, there's so much material, so many movies, so many now TV shows from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It can be daunting to people who are just beginning to enter. And there are folks like that out there. There are new people made every day, and kids grow up and they have to enter at some point. And I think this book will be, I'm really excited for my nephew Henry to get it, because he had Marvel character guide, and he and his dad, my brother Greg, would, for bedtime would flip through and they would pick out a character and they would read the entry on that character, and then it would be, off to dreamland. And that book was so tattered, and I remembered having books like that when I was a kid, about the Goonies and about E.T. that were, storybooks that retold the story of the movie. And that's what this is. If you guys remember novelizations for movies, I don't know if you ever read those yourselves. I used to do that. I would see Batman, and then I would go get see the novelization in the grocery store, and then I would read it again and re-experience the movie. And I have a little collection of novelizations. I just think they were like fun artifacts. I guess they still do them sometimes, but this sort of reminds me of that, because we're retelling the story of all the movies. We're just telling it in a different order, in a chronological order that allows you to see how everything intersects. And I think there'll be fun bedtime stories, to read to kids. This is the story of the 80s in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you can live through that time period, or read the prehistory, or read about the adventures of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the whole arc. All of the character arcs are there, all the story arcs are there. So I think that in addition to being a source of reference to people who might want to check out this or that, or verify what exactly happened, this character or that character, it can certainly be that. But I think in general, it's just a retelling. It's just the grandpa and the Princess Bride sitting down and opening the book, and instead of swordplay and pirates and princesses, it's superheroes and supervillains and catastrophes from space.
I love that analogy. The Peter Falk, Fred Savage of it all. Fantastic. That's brilliant.
That's what I think is I think this is a connective tissue for the generations of fans. Older fans who've seen everything, younger fans who are just getting into it, or maybe don't even remember seeing some of the early movies. And this is I think this will be something. My hope for it is that it will connect some generations of Marvel fans.
Yeah. And I think what's also special about the book, and that was something that I kept in mind too, is that, I mean, you can go anywhere and do a Google search of a character bio, right? Like you can do a bio of Captain America, or who is Tony Stark, who is Natasha Romanoff. But I think what's special about this book is that we're not only telling you who they are, but we're telling you why they are. So it's not just plot points and this happened and that happened, but why did this happen, and how did it change them, and how did it change them going forward? And I think that's something in doing the research, is just realizing how interconnected all of these stories are and all of these characters. So I think that's what makes the book special as well. In writing this book, we want to honor and respect the intelligence of MCU fans. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's a way of us doing that without condescending to them.
Yeah, I think it really was. Somebody we have on this show quite a bit is Marvel's senior editor on the comic side, Tom Brevoort, and he is famous as being probably the guy who knows more about the Marvel universe than anybody else in the world. And even Tom can't keep it straight in his head because it's so vast. So the fine work you guys have done to decode that and analyze it and encyclopedize it is just wonderful. We're racing towards the end of our time, guys, but before we do, a question I'd like to ask each of you is if you could perhaps briefly distill and explain the crux of your personal connection to the MCU. What is it about it that makes it live and breathe for you? Would you like to start, Amy?
I can do this. So many feelings, really. When Iron Man came out, I had just moved out of my very small rural town to Los Angeles. I had started to find a community of fellow geeks in which I felt comfortable being a geek in a way that I just like, and being outward about it than I had in the town I grew up in. And then you meet Iron Man and you meet this whole community that starts to build around the MCU. And I think it's special to me because regardless of the powers people have or what they use their vast wealth to do to help the world, they're very relatable. And Tony Stark is one of my favorites, and I keep going back to, specifically in Iron Man 3, which is one of my top MCU films, when we see him experience actually processing the fallout of what happened at the Battle of New York and realizing that he has anxiety. That was when I got diagnosed with anxiety disorder. So I feel like all of these moments in the MCU, no matter who these characters are, how fantastical they are, there are these moments of humanity that are very real and that you can connect to and find hope in. And I think that's, really special and really accessible for anyone watching them. And they continue to do that, and apparently will continue to do it forever and ever. And I'm here for it.
Brilliant. Me too. What about yourself, Anthony?
Just want to build on what Amy said there about feeling her own personal connection to Iron Man. And one of the things that I try to think about every time I write about one of these movies is the amount of incredible strength that these characters provide to the fans who love them so much. When you're at Comic-Con, if you moderate a panel, one of the things you notice from that vantage point is the very front rows are reserved for people who have disabilities, physical disabilities. And so what I've always found very cool is the way so many of them will incorporate their favorite character into their wheelchair or their crutch or what have you. Like, they'll find some way to make whatever their most beloved character is, who connects with them, who makes them feel strong. They make them a part of the outfit. And you guys may have remembered years ago, a father, he was the father of a premature baby, and he made a little like miniature Iron Man suit for this baby who was in intensive care, who wasn't ready to be born, but was alive and was struggling, and he built this little Iron Man pajamas or something for that baby. And I remember seeing that and being so moved, because it wasn't for the baby, it was for the father, because he saw strength in this character and he was trying to do something in a time where he felt helpless, to add a little strength to his child. And my own wife is a heart patient, and she loves Tony Stark, and Tony Stark is a heart patient. And I've spoken to people who feel deep connections to Spider-Man. They feel deep connections to Black Widow because of the things she's been through. They feel deep connections to T'Challa and Black Panther. An amazing sense of pride in those characters and love for them. And all of these things add up to strength in the real world that is transferred from the fictional world into our own. And I think it's, there are people who are dismissive of comic book movies and superhero characters, and they say this isn't cinema, okay, whatever you want to, whatever you think about that, but you can't deny the power that these stories and that these characters have in people's lives. And really, that's what we need, is we need that power. We need that source of strength sometimes to help us face the real world conflicts and challenges that beset us, whether it is an illness or disability, whether that's visible or not visible, whether it's just a challenge that you face in everyday life, in your job, in your relationships, in your friendships, your place in the world. These characters, they give you that. They're like a multivitamin for the soul. Like, they just give you that little juice. And I think if you're writing about these characters, if you're creating these movies, or you're writing about these characters from the outside, as we are, you have to respect that power. And every one of these characters is beloved by someone for a very meaningful, emotional reason. And I just try to keep that in mind.
Oh, mate, that is so very, very well said. I can't tell you how much I agree. And Rebecca, how about yourself?
Ooh, oh gosh. So building on what Amy and Anthony said, on one level, I think being a kid who read comic books, who read Marvel, and then as an adult seeing these movies come to life in live action, because that's all we used to say growing up. Oh, I wish there was a movie about this, but of course the technology wasn't there. So now being able to see these characters that were on paper, now seeing them on your screen is just incredible. Like, wow. And then also too, I think the great thing about these characters, and I think it's a credit to the writers and the directors of all of these movies, is that the powers are really like a metaphor, right? I mean, with Captain America, his real strength isn't in the super serum, it's his goodness. You know what I mean? And it's the fact that all of these characters are flawed and they're human, even with all these incredible gifts, they still struggle with everyday issues, you know, and we saw that beautifully in WandaVision. She's one of the most powerful beings on this planet, but she's lost the love of her life. And what does that grief look like? And what does that manifest like? And just on a personal issue, when I started working on the book, I had just gone through a very painful breakup with a partner of mine. And for me, writing this book was therapy in a way. I had my real therapist, but also writing through this, but just like seeing how all of these characters, particularly the women, and watching Wakanda Forever, how these women were able to deal with grief, and to really dig in and to find that strength that Anthony talked about. Like that's what makes you a superhero. Like, in a way, I was able to find my own inner superhero working on this book. So I'm really grateful for this project.
So very well said, and what a great way to end our conversation. It's like I always said, if you want a great chat, speak with a writer, and and that summed up this beautiful project, with which everybody watching this can order from the links attached to our conversation, and that's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the official timeline, as created by Rebecca Theodore-Vachon and Anthony Breznican and Amy Ratcliffe. And thanks so much for joining me today, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the very best. And I hope to run into you at San Diego Comic-Con sooner rather than later. Take care. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.